I felt like I needed to go out every time I went out. I needed to get that epic shot, whether it was an epic portrait, an epic landscape, because I'm now a professional. Isn't that what professionals do, right? We always capture epic shots every time we go out, every time we press the shutter button, right? And so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and that drove me into a very dark place.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 374 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I had a tremendous time chatting with Lee Nordby. Lee is a photographer living in Alberta, Canada, who has found his calling in photographing the Canadian Rockies. Today, Lee shares some of the ways in which he's been able to differentiate himself in a very crowded field of incredible landscape photographers living in his area, and some actionable recommendations that will surely make your journey as a photographer and human being a much more enjoyable experience. It's that time again where we need to thank our recent supporters of the show on Patreon. I am so honored to be able to do this on the show because it means that listeners have found that what we're doing here is valuable. You are all so gracious with your time and money, and I couldn't be more thrilled to read off these new names. These 5 generous souls either stepped up to support the show on Patreon or made one-time donations via PayPal. Thanks to Stephane Jean, Joanne Kling, Darlene Sowers, Gloria Olson, and George Calances. If you too would like to help keep the show going, please visit patreon.com/fstopandlisten or head over to mattpaynephotography.com and click on the podcast link for more info on how you can support me. Thank you in advance. All right, let's get to this week's episode with Lee Nordby. All right, Lee Nordby, it's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be on this podcast. I always love talking about photography and the Rocky Mountains and adventure with anybody and everybody that'll listen. So I'm excited to be here, you Matt.
Awesome, and I'm excited to learn all about how you maintain that amazing beard.
This amazing beard actually is gotten smaller over time.
Yeah, I used to have a fairly long beard myself, but man, it gets really rough to keep it up.
Oh, yeah, it does. Maintenance was one reason. The wife was the other reason. You know.
Right. Public ridicule is my reason. So.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Well, Lee, I am familiar with you through social media, but also I know you're associated with Paul Ziska, who was a judge for the competition that I run. And I know that you guys like to go out and do a lot of shenanigans with the ice skates. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about all that fun stuff. But before we do that, for people who aren't familiar with you, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Lee Nordby. I live in Canmore, Alberta, home of the Rocky Mountains. I love the Rockies to get out and adventure. As you said, wild ice skating is one of my favorite mountain adventure activities. The other one is exploring foreign ice caves with my buddies like Paul and Chris. And I have a lovely wife that allows me to get out and do pursue a passion instead of the almighty dollar as a career. I was a former accountant. We'll talk maybe a bit about that in the podcast. And I have 2 fantastic boys. One just graduated high school and is going for his commercial pilot's license, and the other one is about to graduate this year and wants to become a sports analyst.
Oh, wow. My son is 16 and has no idea what he wants to do, and I'm totally fine with that.
Well, my oldest wanted to become a commercial pilot from like when he was a wee lad, and then my other son is flip-flopped and he decided on a sports analyst. So,
well, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, right on. And yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the wild ice skating, because that's honestly, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I associate your name with that all the time. And you're making photos while you're doing it. So what is the secret to making really cool landscape photographs while wearing ice skates.
It can be complicated, and I've landed on my butt a few times, so you got to focus. But I think, as it with all my adventures, it's fun, right? I go out with a mindset of just having fun and channeling my inner childhood. Skating is like playing hockey for me when growing up as a child. So first and foremost, having fun, and then amazingly enough, nature and the way it sculpts things in the ice uh, creates some awesome intimate scenes for me, which I love to shoot. And so I just look out for those while I'm also looking out for hazards and not falling on my butt too many times.
I remember looking at some of your videos and some of your photos of wild skating and thinking to myself, wow, if I had some ice skates and I knew how to ice skate very well, I feel like, and if I had the bravery to go out onto the ice, I feel like that would be one of the best ways to get really interesting photographs of ice patterns.
Uh, you know, every time I go out with my friends, it's a lot of what the heck comes out of our mouths. It's like, what the heck, or more importantly, how the heck did nature create this bizarre pattern all in the ice, right? We've got the common thing, methane bubbles, which are methane that bubbles up from rotting greenery and wood in the base of the lake, all the way up and then freezes in the water. Those are common, but there's all sorts of other stuff that it's just like you scratch your head and you go, how the heck did nature create that, or why? Like what prompted that, right? And I
Yeah,
love finding that stuff because my curiosity gets piqued.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a few really well-known high alpine lakes close to where I live that I would love to go check out someday, but there's quite a bit of avalanche danger involved in
Yep.
reaching them, and so I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's always a catch 22, you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, the lakes that we have skated on are all roadside, and the avalanche hazard isn't a big deal for us. But we're starting to plan and get more adventurous, and once we do that, then definitely need to take that into consideration.
Right, right, right. Well, let's start off the conversation by talking about your journey as a recovering accountant turned adventurer and storyteller. How did that particular transition come about?
Well, I always loved photography. My dad was an avid amateur, and would carry a camera hiking or wherever he went, and so gave my sister and I a Kodak Instamatic. Now I'm dating myself here for all your viewers or read our listeners. And then so I took nice pictures up to 2015, and then decided that I went on a Paul Ziska Dave Brosha workshop, and in the frozen tundra of the Northwest Territories became got a fire in my belly, even though it was minus 50, to learn to become a student of photography. And then in 2016, the company I worked for decided I needed a career change. And so I took all of 2016, the remainder of 16, to reflect upon what it is that I wanted to do. And I kept coming back to photography and pursuing an almighty passion as a career, and hopefully earning a few dollars along the way, as opposed to earning dollars and trying to find passion along the way.
Yeah, it's tough, right? It's hard to balance the two things, and I know that there's very cogent arguments to be made for keeping photography a hobby or something that you just do on the weekends or whatever.
Yep.
And there's a very powerful argument to be made for trying to make the thing that you're the most passionate about your full-time evocation. And I'm curious, for you having some distance in the rearview mirror, what does it feel like to you in terms of making that evaluation?
I think to begin with, it was a real struggle. I put that P in front of my name, P for professional, and I felt like I needed to go out every time I went out. I needed to get that epic shot, whether it was an epic portrait, an epic landscape, because I'm now a professional. Isn't that what professionals do, right? We always capture epic shots every time we go out, every time we press the shutter button, right? And so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and that drove me into a very dark place. And then I fortunately came out of that, and I just realized that if I go out and have fun and enjoy whatever it is I'm doing, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's I'm at a client's I'm having fun with a client, picking the right clients and having fun with them. I'm out shooting for myself. I'm out running a workshop. As long as if I'm enjoying myself, right? You know, things good will happen, right? And I'll get those great shots that I want, or I'll help someone capture those great shots for themselves. So for me, it was just a hard lesson in life, and that I just needed to have fun. And over time, I figured that out, right? And just have fun, and nature will provide, or life will provide you the things that you need to be successful.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I feel like mindset is probably one of the most important tools in the toolbox that we can leverage when it comes not only to our approach to photography, but our approach to social media, our approach to running a business, our approach to how we respond to people on social media, our approach to teaching. The list can go on and on and on. And I found that as long as I prioritize my mindset and make it something like you're talking about, have fun, be friendly, don't put too much pressure on yourself, try to be a relatable human being. I feel like everything else kind of just falls into place.
Absolutely. I think, and do unto others as you would do for yourself, right? Like you say, be friendly, be kind. I think by virtue of the photo community I belong to, you know, there's a lot to be said about collaboration, whether it's a direct competitor or someone that you're teaching, right? And just working together and supporting each other. And again, I've become, the accountant in me would scoff at this, but the photographer in me has become a reality that life gives you back what you put into it, right? And if you put positive things into your work and into helping others succeed, life will give it back to you, right?
Yeah, it's a lesson I learn almost every single week because every once in a while I find myself in a weird headspace and I might say something I regret on social media to somebody. And then of course there's all these cascading ramifications that are negative that come back. And it's like, yeah, just if you were just focused on being positive and being kind, like you're not going to experience that.
Well, no, exactly. And that's right. So I'm always, even though I'm sitting on my couch, responding to someone on social media or responding to a client request or whatever, and I've had a really, really bad day, right? I got to summon the power to come across as very interested in whatever they said or want, and just a positive vibe and a confident vibe.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just today I had just out of nowhere, someone left a like this long diatribe on like a 6-year-old post I made on one of the podcast episodes, talking about how the title of the episode didn't match. Yeah, but it was like this long, drawn out thing, and my immediate reaction was like, seriously. But
Yeah,
then I calmed down and I was like, okay, he took the time to write this thing out. Maybe there's something to this. So I just went into like more of an inquiry type
yeah.
thing, like, so help me understand how I can do this better.
Well, exactly. You got to be like, if you run into those types of situations, I've learned exactly. You got to be inquisitive, because I believe, and I started believing this even before I was in photography. I learned this from one of the people I used to lead. Is 80% of the people in this world, it may be hard to believe, it may be hard to struggle given all the news that we see these days, but at least 80% of the people in this world want to be kind. They want to be helpful. They're not out to get you, which might be your initial reaction to such a post that you receive, right? They're actually got true meaning behind it. So if you're inquisitive and understand why they said that or what they said, then it could probably turn into a much better result. Because I've done the
Right.
opposite. I've done the opposite in previous lives and gone down that rabbit hole and just lambasted into someone with my response. And as you say, I've completely and utterly regretted it since, because all social media is words, right?
Right.
It's
There's no context. There's no body language. There's no voice inflection. It's hard.
exactly communication. 80 to 90% is all nonverbal.
Right. Yeah,
right?
that's the thing I always have to remind myself too. And it's funny because I have a degree in psychology and two degrees in psychology, and
Oh, wow.
I still have to remind myself of this stuff as a 45-year-old adult. So
We're
maybe
human.
someday.
We're human. We're just human, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Lee, you are really focused on kind of abstract and intimate details of the Canadian Rockies.
Yep.
Kind of a strange juxtaposition with a former accountant in my mind. So help walk me through or walk us through how you made that kind of leap from something that's fairly well structured to a process that's very, very, very artistically focused.
Well, I think even as an accountant, I always had this desire to be creative. And although some people may agree with this statement, you never want to, or you disagree with the statement, you never want a creative accountant because, you can get yourself and the accountant into trouble if you're too creative. So, I found photography an outlet for that desire to be creative. And, I've also had this innate desire to, marketing 101 is just to try to be different, right? And I go out with my friends and they're fantastic, epic, wide landscape shooters. And I'm like, how can I be different? Right? Like, and unbeknownst to me, for about 5 years, when I went to look back at my photographs for an exhibit I did, I discovered that I was fascinated with scenes that did not include any mountain peaks in them.
Mm.
Everything from the valley floor through to the hanging ridges and cliffs. I did an exhibit based on that, and then thought that would be it. I'd be done. And then over time, I discovered that as I went out, I became more and more attracted to those more intimate scenes, and really fell in love with how nature can create these ice or snow sculptures, or how it carves rock, how the light casts itself on the ridges, etc., and or the streams flow, mesmerizing abstract reflections to mirror-like reflections. There's just so much beauty that doesn't include a peak in our Rockies.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive though. I mean, like if you've never been to the Canadian Rockies, which I haven't, by the way, but if you've never been there, I'm guessing the first thing you would want to photograph is like this grand vista of all the crazy glaciated peaks and the spires and the amazing light that's hitting them and things like that. So it seems like it would require a lot of restraint and focus in order to not photograph those things.
Well, and you know what? For a number of years, I tried to do that. I honestly tried to do that. And every time I put my camera up to the eye, even though I love the vistas as I drive out, and as everyone drives out to Banff, you are welcomed by these massive, beautiful vistas. And depending upon the time of day you're traveling, the light can be just magnificent on those peaks. But I would put up and I still, this day, I still put my camera up to my eye and I see noise and busyness, and I can't put together just the way my bizarre brain works. I can't put together a compelling composition that's no different than anybody else that
Mm.
comes to the Rockies or that's been shot already. And so I think that's my attraction to looking at the details of the Rockies, and the details for that matter of wherever I go in the world. I've just my eye's been drawn to that.
Yeah, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I would say that one of the reasons that I personally am drawn to smaller scenes like that is that it is a much going to try to use the right words here, not to piss people off, but I find that it is a cleaner pathway to making images that are yours, right? That aren't, replicas of someone else's, which, by the way, if you're into making replicas of other people's images, that's cool. But I've found with almost every conversation I've had with people who have been in photography for longer than 5 or 6 years, you get to this point where you're like, okay, I've done that and I want to find a way to make images that are mine. And I think those smaller, intimate scenes that capture the details of things is one of the best ways to get there.
Absolutely. And, not again, not to belabor a point, one of the impetuses for me to get to those, another impetus for me to get to those more detailed, nuanced scenes is a good friend of mine, when he was working, would come out to Calgary from Ontario and always wanted to go to Vermilion Lakes. And Vermilion Lakes is these three lakes that are located just outside of the city or town of Banff, and you've got the iconic Mount Rundle reflecting in them. You pick one of the lakes, there's three of them, and you get a wonderful reflection of Mount Rundle. And it's one of those bizarre situations where sunrise or sunset, it works for both, right? It's just the way it's oriented. And so he loves to go out there. And so I said, if there's one lake and one mountain that has been shot a billion times, it's those lakes and that mountain, right? It's just been, and the typical is Rundle reflecting in the lake at sunrise or at sunset. And I said, I can't do that. I just can't bring myself. It doesn't inspire me. It inspires other people, and fantastic. Go out and grab those shots. So I said, I gave myself a challenge. I said, I brought my 24-70 with a commitment of shooting only 50 and above and my 70-200. I shot with my 24-70 for 10 minutes and was struggling at 50-70. So I pulled out my 70-200. And to this day, I still got an image, an abstract image of Rundle, just a reflection of Rundle, and it's kind of Monet-ish reflection in that lake. And it was shot 8 years ago. And I still love that shot. And after that, I'm like, oh, this 70-200, this is like God's gift to a landscape photographer, right? And so I took it out, and that became my 1-400. And now that I shoot a different system, it's my 1-500.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Canon, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I switched from Nikon to Canon when I went to mirrorless. And it's because all my friends shoot Canon, and so we can share lenses when we go on our really big adventure days. We can minimize the weight in our packs.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, I still do relish the opportunity to photograph wide angle grand scenes, but I try to do it in a way that's super challenging for me in terms of sight unseen, completely new composition, and try to make sense of it, which creates a lot of it's a higher miss rate. You get to a location and you're like, well, I wish I could piece together a wide angle from this, but I just can't make it work. But I do still love the challenge of that. But I find it, for whatever reason, I find it much harder to make those images now than I used to think of when I couldn't make small scene images.
Exactly. I've almost flipped the way I view the world through the lens is I've almost flipped the world, and I now need to go back to retrain my brain to some degree and try to, like you say, those wide vistas, right? And it's all in the spirit of growing as a photographer.
Right.
I went the long lens way and grew, and now maybe I need to go back to pull out my 15-35 a lot more and get the vistas. I love to use my 15-35, but I love getting up close and playing with distortion, right, with curves and whatnot in the places that I go. So I still use that lens. I don't do the wide vistas. I play with distortion.
Yeah. Well, you had started talking a little bit earlier about your exhibition, which I believe you called Below the Peak.
Yep.
What was the impetus for that particular project, and why did you decide to go in the direction that you did?
In the spirit of growing as a photographer. So late 2019, there's a photo fest in Alberta, the province that I live in, called Exposure Fest, and it's all every February. And so I decided to go into that festival, and I had no idea, no clue, other than I wanted to do an exhibit. I had no clue what to do. And I've developed an awesome relationship with my printer over the time. And Royce, has an amazing background and experience in putting exhibits together. He's done them for himself, and he's done a bazillion for other photographers. So I had coffee with him one day, and after a lengthy conversation, the biggest takeaway I took from that was to come up with a unique theme. And, being a Rocky shooter, unique was not going to include peaks, right? Like that's not very unique. So I went home and I went through, well, at that time it was 5 or 6 years of photos. And as I mentioned earlier, I discovered that I love these intimate scenes. And so I pulled together, I think, 11 of the photos. Like we finally narrowed it down to 11, where it got really painful and I started crying when I had to cut a photo. When I started had to cut a photo, that I knew that when I started crying, I knew that I hit the right number. And then I called it below the peak because it didn't include the peak. It didn't include the peaks. I don't know. I'm not sure where in the process that came, because the meeting was in October and the festival was in February. Somewhere along the process, the name below the peak came to it. And so it had 11 images, because I am a firm believer in smaller number of images is better. And I found a place to host it, and the rest is history, as they say.
Curious, how was it received?
I think it was very well received because it caters to photographers. And so I had a large number of people come, and the thing that I loved the most about it is I was introduced to artistic lovers or art lovers that weren't on social media. They didn't have a clue who I was, and I never had a clue who they were. Right. And it was just another avenue for me to get my work out there and be introduced to some wonderful people. I remember having some great conversations. Some of them were about, like, what does that look like to you? I think they should replace the ink blot test with abstract photographic tests, right? And so I had some great conversations around what it looks like, and the adventures behind it, and what my mindset was and what their interest in art was. I loved it. It was a great experience. And any photographer that's been thinking about putting an exhibit together or simply printing their work needs to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the challenge for a lot of us is finding a venue where it makes sense.
Yeah. And, I know it's quite popular here is coffee shops and wine bars. I was fortunate to find a common space for artists that they rent out their wall space for exhibits. And so, but yes, absolutely right. But you surf the net. There's often calls for exhibits in your area, and I've done that with friends, and we've been successful. So
Nice. I have another topic I wanted to get to, but first I wanted to ask you another question about your project or your exhibition. I was curious if you could speak more about the importance of choosing unique themes for our exhibitions and online galleries. Why not cluster things more generically?
So I think, again, it gets back to what is the story you want to tell, right? Like as a photographer. In my case, I wanted to tell the story of there's beauty and interest and intrigue below a peak. You also want to stand out, right? So and cater to those people. At least I wanted to cater to those artistic lovers, right? And the real art lovers. And so it was important for me to really think about and reflect upon my work, create a unique theme, because I could easily have picked 11 peak shots and talked about them, and people would have been impressed. But many peak exhibits have been done. I wouldn't have stood out perhaps as much, and maybe not have attracted the people that I wanted to attract. So I think it's important just it's important not only for exhibits, but it's just important as a photographer to find your own voice and find your own vision, right? Like we all go through this replication phase in life where we replicate other photographers. And certainly I was accused of being a Paul Ziska wannabe at times in the beginning of my journey. And then over time, it morphed into something completely different. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's right from the vision of finding your own vision as a photographer, and then right through to doing an exhibit, you'll stand out more, and you'll get more pleasure of it. To be honest, I got way more pleasure of pulling that together, and was proud of myself for doing it than had I pulled 11 wonderful peak photos together.
What would you say were some of the things that were instrumental in your progress towards realizing that vision?
Experimentation. Experimenting. I experimented with I experimented with wide. I experimented with portraits. I experimented with color. I went to a black and white portrait workshop in 2015, and my biggest takeaway was, hey, this would be cool to try in landscapes. And I studied many different photographers and what I loved about their work and what I would like to do differently myself, and taking inspiration from different genres like I did from the portrait workshop. You know,
Hmm.
it's 9 years later, and I'm thinking about actually maybe doing black and white portraits. But in those 9 years, I found a real passion for black and white landscapes. So I think, but experimentation and recognize and being kind to yourself, recognizing you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed with experimentation. But at the end of that road, you'll find tremendous joy in discovering the one or two things that you love to shoot.
Yeah. And it's okay if you get tired of doing that too.
Absolutely. So right now, my big goal is to actually go back to maybe a bit more color, right?
Hmm.
Like again, it's always, I feel like if I don't grow as a photographer, I'll die as an artist, right? And so I just want to grow. And so I'm going to maybe experiment a bit more, maybe not the wide sweeping landscape color photos, but maybe some color photos in the stuff that I do, the type of stuff that I do. Again, it's just expansion of my photography learning.
Well, let's talk about black and white. I know that you've currently got a pretty strong preference for it.
Yeah,
Why?
I think it forces. I think one, it's unique. There's I read somewhere there's a 500 million users on Instagram every day. And it's relatively speaking, it's still unique. But I think the biggest reason is it forces you as an artist, forces you as a photographer to rely on what I describe as other storytelling elements beyond color, right? Like you don't have the crutch of a sunrise that's just blowing your mind, where, sadly, you can get away with perhaps a weaker composition because the color is so awesome. Or aurora, you got the aurora pillars with your purples and your reds and your greens just going off like crazy. Again, the story is about the color. And I think with black and white, it forces me as a photographer to look for stronger, compelling compositions or stories to tell. Like I
Hmm.
can't rely on that color. I have to, whether it's lines or text. I'm fascinated by textures and shapes, and so I have to work harder to make it more compelling.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, I was realizing that because you're saying you have to work harder, but by removing color as one of the variables that competes for attention in terms of, oh, that color
Yeah,
story doesn't work, or like these colors don't complement each other. By eliminating that variable, in some ways, it makes your job as a photographer a little bit easier.
it can be. It's easier in the sense you're not looking for the color contrast.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
you're looking for tonal. You're looking for your tonality in the image, but you're not distracted when I'm out in the field. I used to have the black and white view on my camera and just to see how it was shoot. But now when I look at a scene, I see it in black and white, right? So I see the world in a completely different way, and look for and find interesting images in this because I defog the brain from the color. And the Rockies can be so colorful all times of year, right?
Right. And there's a lot of, especially people kind of earlier in their journey, that get really disappointed when, you know, there's no clouds or the conditions
Yep,
aren't super epic. And I feel like if you remove color, that can help you kind of reframe what to look for or what you might be interested in photographing, and give you the opportunity to make images throughout the day.
absolutely. black and white, that's the beauty of black and white. It can work if you look for the right things. It can work all day in the harshest of light. You can find some really cool stuff to photograph.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're not relying on the, well, for us it's the 15 minutes of gold. It's not golden hour, it's golden 15 minutes. um,
Yeah. Right.
uh, you get the epic alpenglow for about 15 minutes, and then you're done. And to me, actually, my favorite time to photograph black and white stuff, especially if it involves mountains of some sort, whether it's ridges or peaks, is the hour or two after sunrise and the hour or two before sunset.
Mm,
Because the sun is lower to the horizon, it gives you those long, foreboding shadows and
right.
a bit of a softer, glowy light to it. So that's my favorite time to shoot. And then definitely in the winter, you can shoot all year round in the Rockies, or all summer, all day long in the Rockies, because the sun is up for very few hours.
Right, and the arc is longer, and so
Yeah,
the angle of the sun is in
yeah,
that position for a longer period of time, and so you have a much
exactly,
larger window for photography.
absolutely, for the real cool light, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, and it was funny because we were talking before we were recording about all the wildfires that you've been getting up in Canada, which I'm sure has a tremendous impact on kind of what we traditionally would consider epic light. Like if you have smoke filling the air for
well,
3 months out of the year.
you know what though, if you go out, if you're healthy enough, right, in terms of your breathing capability, and it's the right level of smoke in the air, you can get some pretty epic apocalyptic images at sunset and sunrise,
Oh,
right?
for sure, for sure.
Right, and so it has provided that opportunity, but it's definitely, during the day, it's this muddy,
Right,
it's this muddy yellowish, just
right. It's
this.
like yellows and cyans and
Oh, it's not very inspiring. I was going to use a different choice of word, but I think I'll stick with it's not very inspiring.
right. But you eliminate color, and that
Yep,
completely changes the
there,
equation.
there you go. Right, as long as you get some tones in that smoke, and there's a bit of texture in there, you can play around with it, and create an equally apocalyptic image. Right.
Right. I remember a couple of years ago, I did a trip in spring out to Utah, and there was this massive dust storm that came through. So it's kind of like smoke. I mean, it had the
Yep.
same color to it.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun photographing in black and white during that time because it just made the scene look, like you were saying, apocalyptic.
Yeah. And you know what? Those, or moody, or whatever the choice of words are. I remember standing in Kulani National Park in the Yukon, being absolutely trashed by dust that was kicked up, at the river delta, and having to clean my camera for 2 days straight. But getting some very coal photos, just the way the light was casting through the dust, and the feel that it gives you. Like, so again, I don't know how many photographers have said this. I think arguably every landscape photographer says this. You don't need in fact, some of the best and most compelling photos come from the worst conditions, right?
I agree.
If you're willing to stand out there and get trashed by whatever system is going through, you'll get some great photos, right?
Right, right. And you can make great photos on a bluebird day with no clouds.
Absolutely. And the beauty of black and white is, you can turn that bluebird sky into something, black, that adds
Right,
some contrast to your photo, right?
right. Yeah,
Add some interest.
absolutely. Well, Lee, it seems to me like when it comes to the mountains, we're kind of kindred spirits of sorts.
Yeah.
We both share an obsession for our local mountain ranges. How has that particular connection for you aided your photographic journey?
I think the sense of wonderment and curiosity. The mountains themselves are so ancient, right? like they're how many hundreds of millions of years old. And so it's just that, like every time I go out there, I'm like, oh, that piece of rock is how old? But then it's the wonderment of what nature creates and the curiosity it creates. It's a sense of adventure. It's the sense of accomplishment, whether it's just out hiking with friends or going up a summit. I reached my biggest peak in the Rockies here a couple summers ago at 11,500 feet at 9:30 in the morning. What a great sense of accomplishment, and it puts me in the right set of mindset to capture some cool stuff. So I think it's the sense of wonderment, it's a sense of curiosity, it's a sense of adventure that just gets me all fired up.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that you spend a lot of time there, and that familiarity with the subject in terms of knowing when the light's going to hit certain areas, how the
Yep.
light's going to look, how the weather works, all that stuff gives you a tremendous advantage in terms of.
I say over time I've learned that the best time for black and white photography, especially if you want to start involving peaks and ridges and cliffs, is like I said, 2 hours after sunset or sorry, after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset. I'm
Right,
just by spending hours and hours and just as I'm driving going, oh, that's cool. That's cool. Right.
right.
You become, or whether I'm going on a glacier travel or going searching of ice caves or wild ice skating, I know that I'm going to find some cool ice stuff, right? And so be prepared to look out for that cool ice stuff, right? And what's really cool and what's, cool, but not cool enough, maybe.
Yeah. I know that there's a flip side to that too, though. And I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit about this. So, I don't know if you do much traveling outside of the Canadian Rockies,
Yep. I've done a bit. Yep.
but when you do, I'm guessing that curiosity and that insatiable thirst for kind of just geeking out about nature helps you respond, combined with that mindset we were talking about before, in a way that you're able to still capture some pretty amazing photographs.
Absolutely. I finished a 4-day Nordic skating adventure in Sweden in January. And, the first day I was skating on the Baltic Sea and I'm like, what the hell? I'm skating on sea ice. And if you haven't done Nordic skating, it's like cross country skiing on skates. It's such a bizarre experience. But there was the sense of curiosity, there's so much similar, but there was so much different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the ice is softer, so we came across this really cool ice structure that looked like a frozen wave, but it was just created by the pressure in the ice, and then the ice being softer, it created a wave, an ice wave. So yeah, I had to spend some time photographing that. So it follows me wherever I go. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
So, as you were talking about ice, I was struck by something that I've found I woefully am missing knowledge about in terms of safety with ice.
Yep.
So, as someone who spends a lot of time wild skating, how do you assess the safety in terms of whether or not you're going to be okay to go out there in on ice skates?
So for us, I guess through experience, but it's also through testing of the ice. So we carry ice screws that you normally use ice climbing, and the ice screw itself, the screw, the actual serrated part is 3 to 4 inches in length. And so as long as we'll dig a hole in the ice, and as long as that hits the 3 inches or the 4 inches, the official Canadian guidance is 4 inches. You're
Of
safe to skate
of
of
thickness.
of thickness of ice. You're safe to skate on. We also, while we're skating, we'll either periodically check it with our ice screw, or we'll check the cracks. The amazing thing is counterintuitive perhaps, but there's always cracks in the ice, and from propagation or just the ice moving. And if you look at the thickness of those cracks and they're 3 to 4 inches, you're golden, right? And so that's how we know how safe it is.
Seems simple enough.
Yeah. Now I have to admit, the first time you're testing the ice, it's a bit unnerving. We do. So there's one person that goes out with a life jacket on that's tied to a rope, right? And they go out and they test the thickness of the ice, right? And then there's one or two of us on the shore or near the shore where the ice is thick enough that are waiting to. Unfortunately, we've never had anything happen. Admittedly, over the years, right, when we first started out, our safety protocols are probably not as sharp as they are today. But we want to enjoy our life and come home safely. So we've upped our game in the safety realm.
Yeah, it's smart. I had a pretty scary situation last winter. I was hiking with a workshop client, actually, one-on-one workshop client,
Oh, wow.
and we were in Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah, and we were in this canyon, and there was this waterfall in this canyon, and this huge pool of water, and tons of ice. And for whatever reason, the ice looked like it was just on top of rock, and I think it was because it was brown.
Oh, yeah.
The water was brown, but
Yeah.
in my brain I was like, oh, the ice is just on top of solid ground, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
No.
No. Oops.
So I walked out on the ice with my camera, tripod, everything, set up my tripod, and then I just fell through into
Oh,
ice
no.
water up above my head, and it was a pretty scary experience. So definitely be
I.
careful.
Oh, yeah. I am. Thank goodness I've never had that experience, and I'm so glad you made it out safe so we could have this conversation today, and you can be with your family. That is scary. And again, it's safety, right? If you're not feeling safe, and no matter what activity you're doing, you don't have to be doing these crazy mountain adventure stuff. Whatever activity you're doing, you need to feel safe because if you're not feeling safe, you're not going to have fun. That's almost a guarantee. Unless you're
Well,
unless you're one of them massive adrenaline junkies,
right.
you're right. And even they know what they're doing, right? And feel safe for their standards, right? So you gotta feel safe.
Well, and that's what messed with me is because I totally felt safe.
Yeah,
Because of the color of the ice, I was lulled into that safe sense of
yeah, yeah,
security.
yeah.
Because I was like, oh, it's just on top of solid ground. I'm fine. So yeah, it can be tricky. So I've heard that there's another test you can do where you can take like a rock and you can throw it up, and if it I can't remember the exact specifications, but if the rock is of a certain weight and if it doesn't penetrate, then you're safe. But I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is I see a lot of rocks on, near the shore of lakes that have been recently frozen, and they're gray. I don't know the exact specifications of that. I've admittedly used that test the odd time, but we have gotten to the point of using our ice screws.
Yeah, that
I
makes a little more sense.
well, having said that, I was out with my ice screws testing the thickness of a lake one this past winter, and I saw a guy out with an axe and wheeling this axe, and I'm like, you can get out, because as we test, we progress, we test, we progress, right?
Right.
And I can only imagine this guy with his axe. He'd never done this because the ice was too thin, but test, progress, and at one point he would whack the ice, and then I could just see him going through, right?
Right.
Because the force of the axe hitting the ice, he could put him right through. So
Right.
I'm like, yeah, that's not probably a best test as an axe, but
Well, good. Now we all know how to safely approach frozen lakes for our ice skating photography, which
exactly.
I don't think you're going to have a ton of competition in that department, Lee.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that love wild ice skating. It's become a massively popular thing here in Alberta, but there's not many people that bring camera gear along, especially expensive camera gear.
Right. You can count me amongst those people. After the experience I had, anyway.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, so Lee, I know that in our correspondence, you had mentioned that you call your times in the Rockies your kind of quote unquote mountain therapy, which helps you manage your challenges with anxiety and depression. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about those challenges and how you came to realize that spending time outdoors was helpful for you.
I was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety in 2009. I'm sure, looking back in my life history, I've had it before, but officially diagnosed. And then I went through episodes, some serious episodes off and on up until 2017, which was my last one. And coming through that, I was just like, I can't do this again, right? And so I got some, physical hormonal issues sorted out. And then I never consciously decided that nature or exercise in nature would be a good thing. I just, over time, realized that the joy that getting out in nature with friends, laughing, solving world's problems, capturing some magnificent photographs, getting a wonderful sense of accomplishment of summiting a mountain, finding an ice cave, skating in ice caves, skating on ice, hiking, just laughing, brought a lot of joy to me, right? And to the point now where myself and even my wife recognizes that if I'm not haven't done one of those days, whether it's even just car going out with friends in the car and just seeing the beauty of the mountains, my mood changes, right? And there's a shift in me. So it's almost becoming a need. And like I say, it's the fresh air, fresh mountain air. It's the exercise, sense of accomplishment, and in some cases, whether it's the photography element or the activity element, mind on task. Otherwise, especially the activity element, I don't come home safe, right? So, and just being out with, most important is just being out with friends and in the outdoors and sitting in the home and sitting in the truck or the vehicle on the way home and going, that was a magnificent day. We got to do that. When are we going to plan that so that excitement builds for the next time?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, you're feeding your mind, body, and soul. You're keeping your mind engaged because of the technical and artistic aspects of photography. You're keeping your body in healthy condition because you actually have to physically move and exert physical exercise in order to get to some of these places. And then you're feeding your soul because you're with your friends and you're outside and you're sharing in stories and laughter. And so it makes total sense.
Absolutely. I come home with it. I'm some of those days have been 24 hours pillow to pillow, and I still got a smile, albeit it's a struggle to get that smile on my face just from sheer exhaustion. But there's a smile on my face when I go to bed.
Yeah, I'll never forget. Gosh, this was 2011. I did this insane backpacking trip with my best friend at the time, where we climbed like 6 peaks, and on
Oh
our
wow.
last day, we climbed a 14er, came back to camp, and then we hiked like 27 miles back to our car or something like
Holy
that
cow.
with
That's
like
a big day.
50 pounds on our back. I mean, it was like
Holy
5
smokes.
a.m. to midnight, something like that. I mean, it was like just nonstop. And I remember the next morning we woke up, and for some reason, my friend had gotten like a urinary tract infection or something because their
Oh no.
face was all swollen and they were dehydrated. But I remember like we had so much fun that we just started laughing.
Oh,
you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. I have struggled on some adventures coming out, and but then as soon as I get in the truck, I go, all of that, and they're physical struggles, right? Like they're just physical struggles to getting out, and then all that just goes away, and then the laughter comes, and your muscles are like, oh my God, your muscles are like, you could barely,
Please
one of the
stop laughing.
yeah. One of the best things that we love to do is we stop at a local gas station on the way out and grab our snacks for the rest of the trip home. I in part love that because I can actually physically move. Otherwise, I think I would I would be as stiff as a board when we hit Banff. I wouldn't be able to actually get out of the vehicle.
Yeah,
But I'm still
yeah,
laughing. I'm still laughing. I'm still, we're still talking about what we're going to do and when we're going to do the next time.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's so exhilarating.
So I'm curious, how much would you say that your relationship with the mountains and your experiences in the mountains contributes to your desire to go on adventures versus, say, just creating new photographs?
I'd argue it's a 51 adventure, 49 photography. Even though I am a photographer, it's about being out with friends and going to some pretty cool places that 90% of the world, or at least the people that live in our area, will not see or visit Banff National Park. And and it's magnificent beauty that we see. And then maybe it's 50.5 to 49.5. I don't know but it's slight edge to adventure in the mountains. But I can almost guarantee you that nature will come. I'll see something that excites me. I don't think I've never come home with a shot that I don't at least like enough to post on social media. It may not be a portfolio. Often it isn't a portfolio shot or something that I'll print for a client, but often enough it's one that gets me excited enough to at least post on social media, because nature just is nature, and I get excited by that. And there is a desire to, I pack all that gear, right? And depending upon the adventure, it's a lot less in some cases, but I pack the gear, so there's a motivation to use it. So I'll bring it out, but I think it's 50.5 or 51 adventure mountains to photography.
Yeah, I'm very similar. In fact, I would probably say I'm 70-30. But I was curious, this kind of, for me, it ties into this relationship of, you know, quote unquote, making it as a full-time photographer in terms of monetization or like being able to actually put food on the table. And I'm curious kind of what your mindset is as it relates to balancing the need to produce high quality work with the knowledge that you now have that the experience is what's really motivating you, and the photography is just a product of that. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that for
Well,
yourself.
there is no doubt that there are pressures, the monetary pressures, and even and with that, directly related to that is the social media pressures, right? Because that's how we as photographers primarily make our living, at least if you're in the workshop uh, business. And so, and that's where I got to consciously make decisions, whether it's just to go out for the sake of going out and having fun, and not caring what I come back with, if anything, uh, uh, or otherwise I'll just twist myself. And that's what twist myself into a dark place. And that's what happened in 17 when I started up my business. I twisted myself into a very dark place because I had put so much pressure on myself to succeed from the business point of view, that my artistic side, the value that people are going to buy, whether it's a print, a commercial client buying the photos, someone just buying a print from you, someone wanting to learn from you, all of that comes from the quality of the work that you produce and whether they love that type of work, right? I'm a firm believer in that, whether it's the wide epic landscapes to the nuances of the natural world, there are people out there that will love your work and will find you, or you will find them, right? And they will ultimately, if you put out quality work, they will pay for whatever it is that you're offering, because that's, and so I think you gotta be smart about how you do the business side. You're a marketer first and foremost, and a photographer second, if and then, but to be that great marketer, you need to be in a great mindset, as we talked about a few times on this podcast. And if you don't have a great mindset, you're not going to produce good work, and you're not going to come across to future clients as someone that they want to work with.
Yeah, and I think that mindset piece that we're talking about also plays a strong role into people who have no desire to do business related activities with their
Absolutely.
photography. I feel like mindset can either make or break your outing. If you let the conditions control the way you feel, or if you let expectations of what you thought you were going to photograph get in the way of just having a good time while you're out in nature. I think those can all have a negative impact on your experience as a nature photographer.
Absolutely. No matter, quite frankly, beyond photography, no matter what you do in life, mindset plays a huge role. But as we're talking about photography, so whether you're this avid amateur that just wants to go out and shoot really cool stuff for your wall or for to showcase to your friends and your family, whatever your motivation is as a photographer, mindset is such an integral role, and having the right one at the right time will help you create the work. And for me, what's worked is I just go out with the attitude, I'm going to have fun today. I'm going to enjoy my work. I'm going to enjoy my work with my client. If I'm out with a client, I'm going to enjoy my time with my friends or my family. And that automatically sets me up for success right away, right off the bat. As soon as I step foot out of the car, I'm in the right mindset. And then just keep reminding myself as whether the conditions are not what you expected or nature isn't providing you what you'd hoped for or whatever the case might be, you just got to remind yourself that I'm here to have fun and I'm here to enjoy life. I can, if I work hard enough and look hard enough, I can find something that's awesome.
Yeah, and relating back to doing workshops and leading clients, I mean, there's a reason why you're called the workshop leader, right? I've always felt like my job as a workshop leader is very similar to being a leader in the workplace, or in an organization, right? Like if I have a positive mindset and I acknowledge the challenges that we're facing, but I'm also like showing people how we can have fun, even though maybe the conditions aren't very good, or you're helping provide people with an experience that maybe has nothing to do with good conditions. Like people are going to remember that, and it's going to rub off on other people. And so I think those are things to remember too.
Absolutely. As a side gig in the photography world, I've stepped in front of the camera as a model for some of my friends' workshops. And, I remember going on one night, a night photography workshop where it is snowing like you wouldn't believe. So expectations are I'm going to shoot wonderful stars. And if I get lucky, the aurora is going to show up. Well, there was no way any of that was going to happen. So the workshop leaders broke out lights, right? And said, I know I can create something cool, and started working with me and other models to create something that was very cool using just lights
Yeah,
in a snowy astro workshop.
I've seen those photos and they're really good.
Yeah, so, but it's about their mindset. Back to what you just said is about their mindset. They could have said, oh, you know what, crappy, we're going to give up, we're not going to do anything, right? Because the conditions aren't, or they could take the attitude that they did and said, yeah, we're still going to create some really epic stuff, and this is how we're going to do it.
Right, right, right. Well, maybe this is a good time for you to segue into us talking a little bit about your annual mentorship program.
Yep.
What is it and why did you create it?
So over my career as a photographer, over the last 10 years, people have dedicated, various photographers, two or three come to mind, have dedicated a lot of their personal time to answering my questions or just reaching out and saying, hey, Lee, that was a great photo, but you know what? You might have considered this, right? And knowing them, I knew it was always, their advice is always given in the spirit of development, right? It wasn't the tip, sometimes the stuff that you see, unfortunately, on social media. I always knew the spirit was good. So, and these are very, very busy photographers, right? And took interest in my development as a photographer. I'm like, wow, that is so cool. And they offer mentorships. And I thought, well, you know what? At some point in my career where I feel I can give value back, I will create this for myself. I'll create a mentorship program where, I'll have people express an interest once a year. And, it set out to be, I was going to do one. And then the first year I did it, I got these great applications and I got down to two. And I'm like, you know what? This is way too painful. Like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do it for myself, let alone one other person, right? So I decided to do two. And it worked out so well because not only did I feel I helped them, but they helped each other and they helped me, right? Like, that's the beauty of this thing is we help each other. And I've started to create this small community. And then I'm in my third year and now it's up to three. And again, it's because, and they're feeding off of each other as well as myself. So, and it's all because of the mentorship and the feedback and the support that I got when I was and continue to get. I should never say I never need feedback and I never need that support because we always do till, death do us part, right? That we always need that support and I continue to get and I just wanted to give back.
What's the structure of it? I mean, is it like,
So there's an annual application process that I set up in December. Maybe the sentimental side of me that thought, wow, what a cool thing to receive on New Year's Day would be a phone call from someone, or arrogance. I don't know, maybe what sentimental or arrogance. I guess it's up to you on how you want to. What a cool thing to receive a call on New Year's Day to say, hey, would you like to be part of a mentorship program? So I set it up in December, applications, and then I review them over Christmas. Part of my Christmas holidays is a struggle to reduce the number of applications down to a small number of people. And then I talk to them on New Year's Day, and then we set it up. And I try to do it. This is a corporate side of me coming out. I set up goals, right? And with each of the photographers, and we meet once a month over Zoom. And then if we can arrange 2 or 3 outings during the course of the year where we can physically get out, then we do that. And we get out and we have fun. And I help them if they want help, or we just get out shooting together. And I'm in my third year of doing this.
and is there a cost associated with that?
No, this is just my way of getting back.
Awesome.
The cost is their time and commitment. So it's their commitment to push themselves, right? That's their cost, their time and their commitment to try different things and push beyond what they're doing today.
I love that. That's amazingly.
Yeah, I honestly have fun doing it. Yeah, it's
No,
a
I
bit
know
extra.
it is fun. Yeah, yeah. I've done
It's a
it
bit
for
extra.
I've done it for a couple of high school kids here.
Yeah,
There's like a charter school here that
yeah,
they require all of their students to go through a kind of internship program.
yeah,
And of course, there's like not really a lot of photographers. I live in a pretty small town, so I'm like one of the only photographers that lives here that puts themselves out as like actually being a photographer. And
yeah,
I've had a couple of students that I've worked with over the last 5 years through that school, and it's the same kind of idea. Like once a month, we'll meet over Zoom, kind of talk through what they're wanting to do, and then give them something to work on, and it's really
yeah.
fun.
It's a black, and you know what? The beauty of it is I learned too. I'm a firm believer that and again, I did this in the corporate world. I learned whatever I was doing in the corporate world, I learned by teaching, right? And I'm learning by mentoring.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a selfish benefit to it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, cool, Lee. So I know you also do workshops with Paul Ziska and Dave Brosha and Chris Andres. What is it like to work with those amazing photographers, and what do y'all have coming up next?
Well, I tell you, it's fantastic. Those guys are awesome. They're great friends, which I think makes life easier. It's also exhausting. Oh my God. Like, I don't know if you ever went out with those guys, but they're, especially Paul and Chris, they are by far the most energetic people. I call them the Energizer Bunnies because they never stop, right? I don't know how they get any sleep anyway. So it's exhausting, but it's a tremendous amount of fun. And again, it we always go in with a mindset of having fun and hopefully helping people along the way, and we invariably do. And so I'm excited that I get to get invited back for the second time to help them out with their Namibian workshop in November.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah. So it's 11 intense days of photography and seeing. I've only been to one African country, so take that with a grain of salt. But I have never seen such a variety of landscape, a tremendous amount of wildlife, and the people are so friendly. And it's 11-day workshop, so we drive 3,500 kilometers, and I'm one of the drivers, and we show people some pretty cool places. Everything from, old mining towns, some of the biggest sand dunes in the world, to magnificent wildlife, lions or elephants, giraffes, all the big ones. And you come home, there's up to 20 of us, including up to 5 drivers and 15 participants, and you come home with great friends.
But Lee, there's no ice there.
I know. I know, and you know what? It's during prime ice season, so that's the biggest downside to doing it. I have to look at social media and go see Paul, because he's not there. It's Dave and Chris. But anyways, he's not there, and so I get to see him going to all these amazing places on skates. But then I get to send him videos of amazing dunes and amazing elephants and amazing, lions and mining towns being taken over by the desert and all that.
It's worth it. It's worth it.
It's absolutely worth missing one wild ice skating season every couple of years. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah. All right, Lee. Well, I have one final question for you. Who do you recommend for the podcast?
Stasha Schmidt. Now, she is. So I mentioned Exposure Fest earlier. She was voted the best up-and-coming photographer in that festival this year. She did a wonderful series called Ephemeral, and it's with her in a ghost costume, taken in the wildest places around, the sand dunes of Mongolia, ice caves of Canada, basalt rock in Greenland. It's a magnificent series. She's a magnificent person. I think she would be a wonderful guest.
Brilliant. Well, Lee, this has been a lot of fun.
It has been a blast. I love talking to photographers, but when fellow photographers enjoy the mountains like I do, it's even that much better.
Absolutely. Thanks again for your time, Lee. I really appreciate it.
You take care, my friend.
You as well. Well, thank you to Lee for the heartfelt conversation here on the show. I really had a great time speaking with you this week, and I think that listeners might want to think about how they can use some of what we discussed today in changing the way that they think about making images. Lee wanted me to mention to listeners that he offers private and virtual lessons and that he's happy to offer listeners a discount. Listeners can just let them know that they listen to the podcast and mention the exhibit that he discussed, and he will provide you with 20% off of his lessons. That sounds like a great deal to me. Thanks, Lee. I would also encourage listeners to take a look at Lee's mentorship offering, as that sounds like a great way to grow as well. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.